Well, today I'm joined by a local author, journalist, and historian, Bruce Mowday. Welcome to ISI, Bruce.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you asked me to come and take part and do this little film and everything. So thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, it's a tremendous honor to have you. We have you speaking at ISI's Christmas open house tonight on the life and legacy of a local poet and travel writer and diplomat named Bayard Taylor. But before we get to Bayard Taylor, I'm wondering, Bruce, if you could tell us a little bit about your own career. How did you, so many people are focused on national issues, and you've written over 20 books, and many of them are on fascinating local happenings, from Lafayette's visit to the Brandywine to Andrew Wyeth and the Brandywine School of Art, and also other local kind of crime thriller related incidents that have happened. How did you become a local historian?
Well, actually, I know exactly when it started, and I was 12 years old. And my grandmothers gave me a set of original newspaper clippings from the Civil War written by my great-great-great-grandfather. So that was a point I got started on history and local and newspapers, and that's very much the origin. And I started working for a daily newspaper while I was still in high school, the old Coatesville Record, which is no longer in existence. And I covered sports. And from there, I moved into hard news, and I've just been doing it my whole life. Spent 20-some years at the Westchester paper, the daily local news. I've had my own radio shows. And in 1997, I left the newspaper when I was a managing editor to become my own boss, and I had my own media relations company. And actually, I did it so I could spend time researching and writing my books. So
that's fantastic.
That's been sort of my career.
That's wonderful. I actually read, there was this book called The Education of an American that was about another local journalist. I'm blanking on his name right now. Are you familiar with that title at all?
I'm sorry, I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll revisit that another time. So what was your first breakthrough in terms of writing books then? When did that come?
Well, I was at the Daily Local News, and I spent most of my career writing and covering the courthouse. I was a legal reporter, and 3 of my books are true crime books based on cases, a lot of them right here in Kennett Square with the Johnston gang and the Wyeths and the stealing of the Wyeths. And then I advanced up the city editor and managing editor, and being a managing editor meant managing the reporters, which was not fun and wasn't really writing. And I was still doing a column a week for the newspaper besides my manager duties, and I really missed writing.
Okay.
And I had an idea for a book, and I had like 3 goals growing up. And one was to write for the newspaper, and one to have a cover of a magazine piece. And frankly, by the time I was 30, I had both of those. And my third one was writing a book. And so I always had that in the back of my mind. And one day, with my Civil War and history background, I was down at Fort Delaware.
Okay.
It was a clone of Fort Sumter. It was known as the Civil War camp for prisoners. Southern prisoners, and I was walking around, and it was a great place, but there was nothing written on what happened and who was there and what were the experiences. And I said, this would make a great book. So that was kind of the germ of the idea. And I still have a friend named Dale Fetzer, and I had met Dale. He's a reenactor, and he did some reenactment for the 61st New York group, which was the group that my ancestors were.
Okay.
And that's how I kind of met him. And it turned out he was the historical interpreter at Fort Delaware. And I met him one day, and I was doing some research. He asked me what I was doing, and I told him I had this idea for the book. And he said he's always had the same idea, so we partners.
Okay.
And my first book, and it was actually Dale's first book, was called Unlikely Allies, and it was Fort Delaware's prison community in the Civil War.
Wow, fascinating. So before we go to Bayard Taylor,
right.
A brief word about Lafayette. So it's the 200th anniversary of Lafayette's return visit to the United States. And he came to the Brandywine Valley. What was that return like?
Yeah, it was amazing. He was here for 13 months. And it was just about every day there was a parade, there was a dinner honoring something going on throughout. He landed in New York City in August of 1824, and actually the American Friends of Lafayette, and I'm a member. I was there to recreate it as much as we could. And we had 1,000 people marching up Broadway, if you can imagine. And when
recently, this was
just recently in August. And when he was there in August of 1824, as one of the members, Chuck Schwam, says of the American Friends, if you thought the Beatles got a great reception in New York, you should have seen what Lafayette got. And there was tens of thousands of people.
Really?
He was an American hero. He was responsible in a large part for getting the French aid, which helped us to defeat the British and win our independence. So the American Friends, a great undertaking and just a whole lot of work. They're trying to recreate each one of those stops as much as possible for the 13 months. And on July 26, 1825, was when he was at Chadds Ford and revisited the Battle of the Brandywine, where he was wounded on September the 11th, 1777. And then he, after visiting the battlefield, he went into Westchester, where they had a dinner for him. So in July of this coming year, 2025, I got to get my centuries right, 2025, we're going to recreate both at Chadds Ford in the morning and in Westchester in the evening. Yes.
Oh, that's
It's
fantastic.
a grand celebration. It's been going on. It's gotten great reception.
That's great. Well, feel free to share those details when you know more about the recreation.
I will.
We'd love to spread the word. So Bayard Taylor, right? Poet, diplomat, travel writer, born in Kennett Square, buried in Kennett Square. Tell us about who is this man? Why should we know who he is today?
Yeah, and I think it's really a shame we've lost him to history. Because, as you mentioned, locally, he was a local writer and was a locally well-known person, but he was more than that. He was internationally known in the 1800s. He was a great travel writer. I really admire him because he saw what he wanted to do and he made it happen. Born in Kennett Square, Quaker parents, didn't really have a lot of backing and money. His education, he was always interested in books and, especially poetry. He was reading, and apparently by the time he was 4, his mother said that he was reading. It was always this great love, and he wanted to travel also. So he had a book of poetry printed when he was a teenager, and he wanted to travel and didn't have the money. But when he went to a lot of newspapers, some in New York City, and signed on, and they would pay him if he would send back travel articles. And that's how he financed his first trip. Yep. And again, he found a way to do it. I really admire the people. Lafayette was sort of like Lafayette had money, but he wanted to come over, and he defied the king and left his young family there to come to help us win freedom. And that's what he wanted to do. And the same way with Taylor, he saw what he, interested in, and he made it happen. When he was in Europe the first time, he went back many times, went throughout the world just about. And when he finally came back, he was urged to do a book, and it was called, Adventures Afoot. Or and it was all of his stories. And he got some great acclaim from that, and he wanted to go back, and he made other trips. His poetry was renowned. He, at one point, had 4,000 people show up. Can you imagine that?
For a poetry reading.
For a poetry reading. If we get that many tonight, we'll be really surprised.
What was that poetry reading about? Or what was
I'm not quite sure what it was. He has books of poetry.
Sure.
That he published, and some of them are Christmas sonnets. So you asked me coming in to tie it to Christmas.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So I have 2 Christmas sonnets that I'll read parts of during tonight's talk. but he was also a diplomat. He was a Russian. They wanted to come to do some things in Russia, and then eventually the U.S. But during all these travels, he also met the stars of the whole that era. He wrote something about Lincoln, and he knew Lincoln, and Mark Twain said he was a great writer, and Horace Greeley worked with him.
Okay.
And the list kind of goes on. Thoreau, when he was in New York the first time working for a publishing firm, they said there's this young writer named Thoreau. You might want to go talk to him. And he was actually instrumental in the first book that Thoreau had published from Walden's Pond. So, he was really the big deal. And he came back and he was there. And during the Civil War, his brother died at Gettysburg.
Okay.
On the second day, and his brother is also buried in Longwood Cemetery, with the same cemetery that Bayard Taylor is buried in. And just my connection with Taylor, if I can tell you a little bit about that, with that book, through my Gettysburg books, I worked and wrote J. Howard Wirt's Gettysburg, which is the largest private collection of artifacts from Gettysburg. Amazing things in there, like the podium that Lincoln used during his Gettysburg addresses in that, and a lot of things from Thaddeus Stevens in there. But it's also, there is a pipe from Taylor's brother. Okay. And a note that Bayard Taylor wrote back to J. Howard Wirt explaining some of this. So that's all in the collection. And, it's actually featured in our book. Okay. My first really connection with Bayard Taylor was when I was writing my book on the Battle of the Brandywine. I was really surprised there was not a book on the Battle of the Brandywine. There were little things here and there, and I was actually on the board of the Brandywine Battlefield Park Associates. I was the president. I was working for the Daily Local News, writing my column. Mm-hmm. And through a newspaper auction, I won. I knew there was a firsthand account somebody wrote with Washington and Pulaski here at Brandywine. And it was a route. So
Pulaski was at the Brandywine?
Oh,
too?
yes.
Really?
Yeah,
okay.
Yes, he was. Yep.
Wow.
The article was written, I think it was 1801. It was a New England paper. Really a rousing account, talking about it. And I was just going to write a newspaper article on it. And I went to the old Chester County Book Company, which doesn't exist anymore, and said, I know the history, but I don't know the history. Yeah. I know the basics. Sure. September 11th, 1777. I said, I'd like to buy a book on the Battle of the Brandywine. They said none existed. And as soon as they said that, I said, well, kind of the heck with the column. I'm going to write
the book. Yeah.
And 6 years later, my book came out. A lot of research, a trip to London to get the British Army records. I went to the British Army Museum. But I was doing, as I was putting it together, I came across an article, one of the first ones published by Bayard Taylor. On a trip to the Brandywine battlefield. Really? And it's just wonderful. And he said he always wanted to go, and he talks about being there and what he saw. It's many years after the battle, but it just showcased this young writer on how he could write. And it was no wonder he got so many books published. Just the flow and kind of led into his poetry. So I was talking with my publisher and editor, and I said, we need to have this in the front of the book. Yeah. And, this great writer from the area and his description. So we actually had Bayard Taylor's, trip to the Brandywine battlefield in the front of the book. Wow. So I had that, and then I run into him and his brother again in artifacts from Gettysburg a little bit later. So there's just so many interesting things that Taylor's here, and he deserves to be remembered. Mm-hmm. You look at Kennett Square today; it's all about mushrooms. Yeah, you have, and I love mushrooms, and I actually did a book on mushrooms with the American Mushroom Institute. But you had the Mushroom Festival, and the Kennett Square is known as the mushroom capital of the United States, and you had the mushroom ball being dropped on New Year's Eve, and everything's mushroom. And where is Bayard Taylor?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it goes back a few years ago, and Taylor, the library was named for him, the Bayard Taylor Library. And actually, I brought it along, I'll show him tonight. I purposely became a member of the library because on their library card was a image of Bayard Taylor, which I have. And so this was great. It's a great way to pay homage to him. But then the whole library was kind of small. It needed expanded. A lot of back and forth in the community. They finally get this new building. It's a great library, and they did a name change.
They dropped the name, or they added a new sponsor.
Well, no, it drove me nuts. I didn't get a vote, or else I would have voted against it. I was talking to people, and they knew I thought they ought to keep it. They actually kept a room, the Bayard Taylor, so he's recognized
he's
in there
in some way.
But it's now called the Kennett Square Library.
Okay.
What a sexy name that is. But they figured, if you call it the Bayard Taylor, nobody knows where it is. And I still think, they could have the Bayard Taylor, Taylor Library at Kennett Square or something.
Sure. So what was the education of Bayard Taylor like? I mean, we know where he went to school, but was it unusual for sort of a man of letters, kind of a humanist, the sort of Renaissance man, to just emerge? Did he have any special kind of upbringing, or
I think it was mainly, from what I can gather, it was his interest. He lost himself in books as a kid. His parents really encouraged him to do that, and he had the spirit. And he said, "I want to travel. I want to find out about things." And he found ways to do it. He became a midshipman when he wanted to get to the Far East on a naval exploration. Like I said, he went out west for the gold rush and did a very successful book. I think it was El Dorado.
Okay.
And then he published. So, he had the grounding, but it was a lot of it, I think, was self-taught and encouragement from the parents rather than going to University of Pennsylvania or Princeton or someplace in one of the big schools at the time.
Okay.
And those type of people really fascinate me. And a lot of people say I have a lot of different genres of books. It's true, but when you look at it, I'm really fascinated by people and what makes them tick and why they do it. Their motivations could be good or bad, because I've written about criminals and also about Lafayette and other people. But I think with him, from what I can gather, was self-motivation, that inquisitive mind, that exploration, and he wanted to find out for himself. Today, a lot of people sit back and will do their internet searches. He didn't. He went out west. He went to Europe. He went to, I think it was Antarctica, and he was just around all these explorations, but he did it all himself. Yeah. Which it just enhances everything.
Yeah, and he did it at a time when it's not like you could just head into Philadelphia, catch a flight. I mean, this was arduous travel for months on end to the far-flung regions of the world,
and he was away from home for a number of years. When he got back from one of his first trips, he had a high school sweetheart, which he wanted to marry, but he also, at that point, was living off of little profits from the books, and he knew he had to have money to support the family, and he went up to New York newspaper, and that's when he went out west. And when he came back, he was in a position to marry her, and he did. But really tragic was that she was suffering from a serious illness and died within months of being married. And that kind of curtailed his writing and his interest, as it would anybody having a loved one like that die. And finally, he again went off to Europe, and during the trip, he met a relative of a friend of his who I think was from Germany and married her, and that's when he had one child, Lily.
Okay.
That
are there any descendants today? Or?
I think there are out there. Yes, I'm not quite sure, but I'd be surprised if there's not. Lily married, I know, but I didn't really check to see if there's other. Taylor's the big name, of course, in the Kennett area, and also in the Quaker community. They were Quakers very much.
And then he was, traveling to, growing up in Kennett Square and born in 1825, kind of in the early to middle 19th century, very different political culture than a lot of the countries that he visited, where it was still, monarchical regimes or perhaps, other structures and forms. Did he write any interesting insights on what he encountered?
Yeah. And again, you said 1825. So it was only 50 years since we won our independence.
Yeah.
The country was still struggling with slavery and, the terror between the free and the slave states. So, here was very interesting times and leading up to the Civil War. And like I said, his brother died in the Civil War. And to go and visit with the czars of the time.
In the courts, they would receive him.
Courts, yes.
Wow.
So the culture was very much, and I think that was some of the reasons that his travel books were so well liked and popular. And I think that first one it was like 15 printings in a dozen years or something. It was very popular, and he was very much a known writer throughout the United States, but also in many different countries.
Okay. Absolutely fascinating. Are you able to buy, his travel writings today? Is it?
Where I first encountered him was at the Bayard Taylor Library, and you went downstairs into the room, and it was sort of like the library here with all those great old books, and they had them behind closed doors and locked doors, and they have them in the new library. Reprints, I haven't really seen many, but yeah, I've had the same quest, kind of looking for them to see. I'd love to get a hold of an original copy, which I really like. But again, with the writing of that period, I think a modern reader would find it a little turgid, maybe. And so I'm not sure if a publisher would kind of print en masse a lot of them, but just to study it and see what it experienced. And as you said, the many insights from the Far East and Europe and Russia and the gold rush, I think it would just be so instructive for a lot of us to see where our roots were. Yeah.
And as you think about Bayard Taylor's legacy today, obviously his home, Cedarcroft, I think it was for sale for a while. Maybe it's still on the market.
He sold it before he went, after one of his trips, and he came back, of course, after he was married, and they had Lily, and they came back. They wanted to go to New York City because that was really the base of his publication, and sold it and went to New York City. And that's when he was engaged for some diplomatic things to go back to Europe. And on the boat ride over, he met Mark Twain.
Okay.
So it was pretty interesting.
On the ride over to Europe.
Yep.
Okay.
And when he arrived, he caught a cold, and I think he died in Germany.
Okay.
And of course brought his body back. But,
sure.
They had sold Cedarcroft, and he visited Cedarcroft once after he moved to New York City before he left and his death.
So you could you could almost imagine today, his former home becoming some sort of institute or research center, and you can kind of envision the educational programs, the lecture, the things that could be mined out of all of these travel logs and poems and novels. If you were given an opportunity to kind of do that, or sort of really share more about his legacy, his political principles, other things, what to you really stands out in terms of why Kennett and the Brandywine should take Bayard seriously?
Well, again, I think it was the first sort of star in the writing and exploration, because they call him a travel writer, but he was also explorer.
Sure.
There, and he really put Kennett Square on the map and this area. At that point, he had to be the leading person, well known in this area and beyond. He certainly pioneered a lot of the writing styles of travel and just stepped up everything. Poetry was big back then, and he was a leading poet. So.
Wow.
It's that legacy that he did over the years rather than any one. I think it was an observation of the world that really makes him important. And like I said, wish we wouldn't have lost him, and maybe we can get him back.
Maybe we can bring him back.
Yes.
So one closing question for you. So we have a journalism program at ISI where we have a network of about 100 campus newspapers where we help, train the journalists and host their websites and teach them, journalism ethics and bring them together, several, different parts throughout the year.
Much needed.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. So I'm curious, because we have a lot of young aspiring journalists, hundreds of them that are involved with ISI. So from your own career, and I know it's changing media landscape, but obviously the fundamentals stay the same. What advice would you have for a young aspiring journalist today?
I go back to my basics where, a journalist should be telling a story. An important story. It doesn't have to be a big story. It could be a small one. It could be your community story. And community stories are very, very important. But you need to be, honest. You need to, like I said, both sides, balanced.
Sure.
And you need to be accurate, and you can't give in to the immediacy of social media.
Sure.
Because now, you got to get it up there first, and you don't check the facts, and it's totally wrong, and it's up there.
Yeah.
And I think that has done a disservice to the public and to journalism.
Yeah.
Both that, because I hear so many people say, where can you go to get news that you can trust and rely on? And a lot of people are just, they're just
at a
lost.
Yeah.
And I'm the same way. And what I've been doing is, I have a list of 30 or 40 or more, and I haven't counted them in a while, of internet sites from different newspapers. And, I'll pick a half dozen or a dozen each morning and kind of read the headlines. I'll say, well, this and this, and somewhere in the middle is the truth.
Sure.
You try to get it. So I think a really good journalistic one, fair, balanced, both sides, not propaganda, that's what really needed. And I would urge all your young journalism students to, aspire to be that type of a reporter, to dig, don't be influenced, and give, if it's good or bad, give the story and tell the public. If you don't know, you just let them know that, you haven't been able to find out.
Sure. Well, we'll end on that note. Thanks for coming out to ISI, Bruce.
Thank you. I enjoyed this. Good.